in Excel 2007. File open. Excel homework number 2. Blow this up so we can see it. It's 2 times. Okay. Type your name. Again, I'm just doing this to remind you. That's a generic name. Make that look cuter so that we can see it all. First thing I'm going to do is to name these ranges, and that works the same as with Excel 2010. So let's see if I can find it quickly. Data. Wasn't it? It's under formulas. Create selection. Create names from selection. Sees the labels in the top row. Click OK. Don't change anything. And now this range is called X. This range is called Y. Alright, over on the left here we're going to have entries for the sum squares of X, sum squares of XY, sum squares of Y, an entry for the slope, beta hat 1, which I'll call beta 1 just for short, an entry for the intercept, beta 0, beta hat 0. Then we're going to calculate the correlation, get the t-calc, the correlation coefficient, and compare it to the critical value t-crit to be able to do a very simple t-test. But before we do those things, I'm going to name these ranges again. So under formula, ribbon, the name manager, create names from selection. It sees the labels in the left column, don't change anything. Now this is called S of XX, SXY, right, look in the name box here, SYY, etc. So I've placed those formulas there so we can see them easily. Alright, so now that we have named ranges, we can just type those labels, the x's and etc. So just watch the first one. So sum squares of x is equal to the sum of the x's squared. Right? Normally you can't do that in Excel, but this works. This is a trick I'll show you later. Minus n. Don't have a value for n, but we can count the x's, and that's the n, times x bar squared, the average x, close parentheses, squared. Alright, and then hold the shift and control key with your left hand, hit enter with your right, and you get a value. If, for instance, I hit F2 to get that formula up again, you hit enter, you'll get an error. Hit F2 again, shift control enter, get the correct formula, the correct calculation. Sum squares of xy, SXY, sum of x times y, minus n, again count the x's for the n, times x bar y bar, x bar is the average x, times y bar, the average y, again shift control enter, correct value. SYY, sum squares of y, equals the sum of the y's squared minus n, which we'll do is the count of the x's. You can do the count of the y's also if you like, times y bar squared, and that's the average of the y's, close parentheses, squared. Again, shift control enter. Beta 1 is SXY divided by SXX. You just type those things, the cells, the appropriate cells light up, hit enter. You don't have to hit shift control enter there. Beta hat 0, y bar minus beta hat 1 times x bar. So y bar is the average y minus beta hat 1, or just beta 1 in our case, in my case, times x bar is the average x. Again, you do not have to hit shift control enter here, just hit enter and you get the correlation now. Correlation is equal to sum squares of xy, SXY, divided by the square root, and in Excel to get the square root, SQRT, times sum squares of x, S of XX, times sum squares of y, SYY, close parentheses, enter, and you get a negative correlation as we have a negative slope, strong negative correlation. T-calc, the formula is over there. Correlation is CORR, Excel doesn't like R as a name, divided by square root, under the square root we've got two terms, so we'll need two parentheses. First, for the numerator under the square root, 1 minus correlation squared. Make sure your squared is inside that first parentheses. Close the first parentheses, divided by, open a second set of parentheses, n, which is the count of the x's, minus 2, right? Close the parentheses for the denominator, close the parentheses for the square root, enter, and we get a minus 4.66 t-calc. T-crit. T-crit is different in 2007 and 2010. It's the same as in 2007 and 2003. Those T-inverse, probability 0.05 for two-tailed test, degrees of freedom, which we'll do is the count of the x's, minus 2 and minus 2. And we get a critical value of 3.18, etc. I want you to do a simple t-calc, or t-test rather, and in other words, I want you to tell me if this is significant or not, and I want you to use a formula. So this is if the absolute value, absolute function strips off the minus sign, just gives you the distance from the value to 0. The absolute value of t-calc, which means 4.66, is greater than the critical value, t-crit, then we want the words significant to pop up in the cell. If it's less, some students might have data set that gives an insignificant. Alright, so the if function has three elements. First, a condition. If the condition is true, then whatever appears either as a label or as a calculation appears in from the second part. If it's false, then whatever appears in the third part appears. Okay, again, could be a label or a calculation. Hit enter, and of course we get significant showing up. And again, just like I did in 2010 Excel, I'll put a t-calc inside the critical values and show you that insignificant shows up. Again, go back, Control Z. Alright, in the last part we're going to do a chart. Mark your X's and Y's without the labels. Insert ribbon. We want a scatter diagram, and we want the first type here. Pull this off so it doesn't run over the data. Clean this up a little bit. Get rid of the, delete that. Left click, delete on those lines there. Left click any one of these data points. Add trend line. And we're going to display equation on chart. That's the only option we need there. And as I said before, for 2010 Excel, do not type that in. I want you to get it, this equation, using the trend line function. Okay, and there's our scatter diagram, XY plot, including the regression line and the line typed in using Excel. If all you need is 2007, that's it. You save it. All right, but save it in not an M03 format, but in just Excel workbook. Save. All right, so that it keeps all the functionality of 2007 there. Okay, if you're going to send it to me now, remember to attach the file and also to copy the email to yourself so you have a record if it gets lost somehow that you set it before the due date.